the Safety Edge podcast, where safety leaders sharpen their edge. I'm Charles Edgar, your safety leadership coach. In this podcast, we explore the real dilemmas safety leaders face on site and in the workplace. Not textbook examples, not perfect scenarios, but the challenging, uncomfortable human moments when there is no obvious right answer and the pressure is real. And in each episode, we unpack one real-world leadership dilemma and explore how adopting a coaching mindset can make the difference. Not by controlling people, but by sharpening how we think, listen, and lead. In Season 1, we explored leadership under pressure, what happens to safety when urgency compresses thinking. We saw how pressure subtly distorts judgment, how busyness reflects reflection, and how the gap between what organizations say they value and what actually gets rewarded quietly widens. Most importantly, we uncovered the moments before things go wrong, the near misses, the overlooked signals, the learning opportunities that slip by when leaders rush past reflection. Season 1 showed us that risk doesn't always make noise. It grows quietly in the spaces when no one stops to ask, does this still make sense? That brings us to Season 2, where we shift our focus to voice, silence, and psychological safety, exploring what happens when people comply but don't speak up. Because the real edge of safety isn't just about rules, it's about creating the conditions where people feel safe to think, question, and act, even under pressure. In this season, we'll dig into the human side of safety, one conversation, one choice, and one moment at a time. In today's episode, we will explore a conflict between compliance and engagement. When people comply, follow procedures and instructions, but no one speaks up, even when they notice something is off. And when people stop speaking up, risk just doesn't disappear, it goes underground. Now let's unpack the dilemma. Picture this, it's a routine day on site. A critical activity is to be undertaken. Nothing unusual on the plan. No deviations flagged in the morning meeting. The toolbox stock runs on time. Permits are reviewed and signed. Isolation points are listed. The job steps are read out clearly. Everyone nods. No objections. No questions. No pushbacks. From the outside, it looks like discipline, alignment, and control. And the job begins. As the work continues, something subtle begins to emerge. A nearby process line gives up more heat than expected. Not enough to raise an alarm, just a little bit unusual than it normally is at this point of the operation. At the same time, one team member notices an unusual sound and a light vibration. It's slight, intermittent, easy to dismiss as normal background noise. Another team member checks a nearby pressure gauge on the line. It's still within limits, but is sitting closer to the upper range than it normally does under normal conditions. Nothing has crossed the threshold. No alarm. No trip. Nothing significant necessitating immediate action. They exchange a glance. One thinks maybe the process is adjusting and trying to fully stabilize. The other thinks the control room hasn't said anything. They both glance towards the supervisor nearby. Earlier today, He had been laser-focused on pushing the schedule forward, racing to meet the deadline set by management. He had stressed during the toolbox meeting that every minute counted, and he knew any hesitation now could draw unwanted attention. At this stage, the job is moving, momentum is building. Raising concern would mean interrupting the flow of work. It would mean asking for a pause when everyone else is racing ahead. It would also mean explaining a feeling, not a fact. And in that moment, hesitation feels safer than action. So they stay silent, the work continues. Later, the condition worsens, just enough to trigger attention. Rapid pressure fluctuation and a minor leak that forces intervention. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to spark questions. And during the review, the familiar statements appear. All readings were within limits. No alarms were active at the time. No one raised any concerns. Technically, everything checks out, but the operator saw the early signals. They sensed the system was drifting. They just didn't feel confident enough or safe enough to interrupt the work. The system didn't benefit from their judgment, only from their compliance. Not because procedures failed, but because thinking remained unspoken. Now the real dilemma emerges. How do you lead in a way that makes subtle concerns speakable before they become obvious problems? Because next time, the signal might be just as quiet, but the consequences may not be. From where you stand, something feels wrong, and the moment demands a response you're not sure how to give. Now you are in a dilemma. You are standing in the space between compliance and commitment. The dilemma for you is this: do you take comfort in the fact that people complied with instructions? Or do you confront the harder truth that they may not feel safe enough to speak? Why is this a true leadership dilemma? This is a true leadership dilemma because compliance looks like success. After all, work gets done, instructions are carried out, rules are being followed, but silence is not neutrality. Silence is information. When people stop speaking up, it's rarely because they don't care. It's because they are calculating risk. The risk of being wrong, the risk of slowing things down, the risk of being labeled difficult, and the risk of challenging authority. Under pressure, leaders often reward speed, certainty, and decisive action. And without realizing it, they oftentimes penalize doubt, questioning, and hesitation. So people adapt. They comply, they follow instructions, and they protect themselves. That's how psychological safety erodes, quietly, gradually, invisibly. And what do most leaders do in these moments? First, many leaders equate silence with alignment. No issues raised, everyone agreed. We are all on the same page. But agreement without voice is not alignment, it's rather submission. Second, leaders unintentionally signal impatience. Meetings are rushed, questions are cut short, and oftentimes met with impatience. Decisions are made quickly without recourse to the opinions of those at the coalface. The message becomes clear. We don't have time for this. Your opinions do not count. Third, leaders rely on systems to compensate for silence. Procedures, checklists, protocols and controls. But systems only show what's reported, not what people hesitate to speak up about. And that's where latent risk accumulates. It doesn't just disappear, it simply goes underground, waiting for the right conditions to align. And then, boom, the hazard is released. Now let's see it from the coaching lens. This is where it makes a difference. The job is now complete. The area is handed back to operations. Everything appears normal. No more alarms, no incidents. You gather the team, not to investigate, not to assign blames, but to reflect. You say, before we close this out, I want to ask something simple. Was there any moment today where something didn't feel quite right? Even if it didn't get to the level of stopping the job. Then the room goes quiet. Silence, not resistance, not defensiveness, just hesitation. You don't rush it. You wait. Finally, one operator speaks up.
I observed something. I wasn't completely comfortable with it, but I didn't think it was serious enough to raise as an issue.
You respond. What made it harder to raise your concern? He responds back.
Honestly, no one else seemed to be concerned, especially as the job was moving on, so I didn't want to be the one slowing things down.
Another voice joins.
I noticed something too, but when no one else said anything, I figured it probably wasn't that important.
Now the room shifts, not towards blame, not towards justification, but towards awareness. The supervisor speaks slowly and thoughtfully.
That's tough to hear, because from where I stood, everything looked under control to me. I thought my approach was helping the team. I didn't realize it might have made it harder for concerns to surface.
He continues.
It strikes me now that silence wasn't agreement. It was uncertainty. And I didn't make it safe enough to speak up. I guess that's on me.
Then you respond. So today, we didn't just rely on procedures. We relied on silence. That moment changes the conversation. It's no longer about what went wrong, but about what nearly stayed hidden. Not about compliance, but about voice. Not about whether the system worked, but about whether the system was thinking. And that's where real learning begins. Why this approach works? This approach works because psychological safety isn't about comfort. It's about permission. Permission to question, permission to hesitate, permission to sound uncertain. A coaching response replaces judgment with curiosity. It makes voice normal, not exceptional. Over time, teams learn something powerful. Speaking up is not a disruption. It's rather a contribution. Here's the key insight from this episode. Compliance can coexist with risk. People can follow every rule and still withhold what matters most: their thinking. When psychological safety is low, silence feels safer than honesty. And leadership always sets that tone, not through policies, but through reactions. Every time a leader dismisses a concern, rushes a conversation, or signals impatience with questions, the system learns and adapts. But every time a leader pauses and asks, what are we missing? What feels uncertain? What makes this hard to say? They send a different kind of signal to say, voice matters, judgment matters, your opinion matters, you matter. Strong safety cultures aren't built on compliance alone. They are built on courageous conversations that surface risk before it becomes reality. That is the edge. As we wrap up, let's take a moment to reflect. Where in your organization might people be complying but not speaking up? What signals might leadership be sending intentionally or inadvertently? And what is one small change you could make today to invite voice instead of silence? Because safety doesn't fail when rules are broken. It fails when people stop talking. If you had an inflection point from today's episode, please leave us a comment and share your reflections. Your insight might help another leader create space for voices that are currently silent within their team. While here, make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to invite a friend or colleague to listen along with you. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Safety Edge podcast. I'm Charles Edgar, your safety leadership coach. And until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep sharpening your edge. Bye for now.
Brought to you by the Safety Edge platform, an independent leadership and safety learning platform, building leadership capacity, one conversation at a time. Find us wherever you get your podcasts